The alien scholars arrived above Earth in a wide silver ring that moved without sound. From orbit, the planet looked calm. Blue oceans turned slowly under white clouds. Cities glowed like steady stars. To the scholars, it looked orderly and tame. They had studied many species before. They believed they understood emotion. Rage in their records was a simple flaw. It was loud, wasteful, and easy to predict. A species that felt rage could be pushed into mistakes. A species that feared rage would avoid it. Humans, the scholars believed, would be no different. Their ships entered Earth space with careful signals of peace. They announced their purpose clearly. They were observers. They wished to study human behavior, culture, and emotion. In return, they offered knowledge of stars, energy, and medicine. The offer was generous but also calculated. Earth accepted. James Carter stood in the central meeting hall when the first delegation arrived. He was tall, calm, and dressed in plain dark clothing. Beside him stood Emily Ross, quiet and focused, her hands folded in front of her. Neither smiled too much. Neither showed fear. The scholars noticed this. The alien forms were tall and thin, their skin smooth and pale like stone. Their eyes were large and dark, unblinking. Small devices floated around them, recording sound, heat, and movement. Every breath James took, every blink Emily made was measured. The meeting began with careful words. James spoke slowly, choosing simple language. He welcomed the visitors and spoke of cooperation. He spoke of shared learning and peaceful exchange. His voice did not rise. His face stayed neutral. Emily followed, explaining Earth's laws and boundaries. She spoke of respect and safety. She explained that humans valued life and dialogue. Her tone was steady. Her heart rate, the scholars noted, stayed low. The scholars recorded everything. They saw no threat. Over the next weeks, the scholars spread across Earth. They visited cities, farms, oceans, and deserts. Humans allowed it, with limits. The scholars watched families eat together. They watched children argue then laugh. They watched strangers help each other after accidents. They watched humans line up patiently even when tired or angry. They saw protests too. Crowds shouted and raised signs. Voices were loud. Faces were red. But the crowd stayed within lines. Police stood back. No weapons were used. When the protests ended, people went home. The scholars made notes. Rage expressed but contained. They observed war history next. They studied old footage of battles, bombs, and loss. Millions dead. Cities destroyed. The scholars paused here, curious. How could a species capable of such destruction now act so calmly? They adjusted their theory. Rage is strong in humans, one scholar noted, but it burns fast. It is followed by guilt and restraint. They watched James and Emily again. In private meetings, difficult topics came up. The scholars asked hard questions. They suggested that human systems were flawed. They spoke of experiments, of tests, of limits. James listened. Sometimes he disagreed, but he never raised his voice. Emily corrected false assumptions with facts, not emotion. When talks grew tense, both paused, breathed, and continued. The scholars recorded this as weakness. Humans avoid confrontation, another scholar said. They fear their own rage. Emily once noticed the floating devices watching her closely. She glanced at James. He met her eyes for a brief moment. Nothing was said. The moment passed. The scholars did not understand that look. They continued their studies. They measured human brain activity during stress. They ran simulations of conflict. In every test, humans chose delay, discussion, and compromise before violence. The data was clear. Predictable, the lead scholar concluded. They value control over action. In one session, a scholar asked James a direct question. Why do humans fear anger? James paused. He did not answer right away. We don't fear it, he said finally. We respect it. The scholars marked the answer as cultural phrasing. Later, Emily walked alone through a quiet park. Trees moved gently in the wind. People passed her without notice. Above, far beyond sight, alien ships watched. She thought about the questions asked that day. About how often the scholars pushed just a little more each time. She felt something tighten in her chest, but she let it go. This was not the moment. The scholars continued to believe they were safe. They believed they had time. Their final report from the observation phase was sent across their network. Human rage is controlled, it read. It is guided by rules and emotion. It limits their response. Under pressure, humans seek balance, not dominance. They are unlikely to act with full force. They are manageable. James and Emily never saw that report. If they had, they might have warned them. But the scholars were confident. They believed they had studied everything that mattered. They believed rage was loud and obvious, something that showed itself early. They did not yet understand that human rage often waits. It watches. And it remembers. The attack began far from Earth, in a quiet human colony built on red soil and thin air. It was a young settlement, still growing, still hopeful. Homes were small. Power was shared. People knew each other's names. The alien scholars called it an experiment. They said they wanted to test human response to loss. They chose the colony because it was distant, lightly protected, and easy to observe. Their ships did not announce themselves. They entered the system without warning. From Earth, the first sign was a signal spike. Michael Reyes was on duty when the alert came through. He worked in a media monitoring center watching deep space feeds. At first, the data looked broken. Static filled the screen. Then shapes appeared, fire, debris, fast movement. Michael leaned forward. His hand tightened on the console. The feed cleared. Buildings were burning. The colony's sky was dark with smoke. Sirens screamed in the background. People ran, small figures against massive shadows moving above them. Jessica Miller stood behind Michael. She had just entered the room with a cup of coffee. It slipped from her hand and hit the floor, forgotten. "No," she whispered. The broadcast was live. A human voice came through the noise. It was broken, panicked, but clear enough. "This is Colony 7, the voice said. "We are under attack. This is not a drill." The feed shifted. A street camera showed a medical station collapsing as energy struck it from above. Another camera showed a group of civilians sheltering behind a transport vehicle. The vehicle melted under a second strike. Michael felt his breath slow, not speed up. His mind focused. "Send this to global channels," he said. His voice was steady. Jessica nodded, already moving. Her hands shook, but she worked fast. Within seconds, the broadcast spread across Earth and every human network beyond it. The scholars watched too. From their stations, they recorded the human reaction in real time. Heart rates rose. Voices increased. Online traffic surged. Emotional language flooded the networks. "Rising anger," one scholar noted. "Fear response." Another tilted its head. "Disorganized. No clear pattern." Back on Earth, the broadcast reached homes, offices, schools, and ships. People stopped what they were doing. Streets grew quiet. Screens filled with the same burning sky. Michael and Jessica watched in silence as the feed continued. A man stood in front of the camera, blood on his face. He was not shouting. He was tired. "They said this was a test," he said. "They said no one would be hurt." Behind him, something exploded. The feed cut out. The room went silent. Jessica felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not cry. She pressed her lips together and took a slow breath. Around her, others did the same. No one screamed. No one spoke. Michael closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he opened them. "Save everything," he said. "Every frame." Across Earth, people began to respond, not with chaos but with stillness. Messages stopped being angry and became short. Locations were shared. Names were listed. Resources were offered. Doctors checked supply counts. Engineers ran power tests. Fleet crews reported early. Civilians opened homes to strangers without being asked. The scholars saw the numbers. They saw emotion rise then level out. "Peak rage passed," one scholar said. "Return to baseline expected." They were wrong. In military centers, officers did not shout. They listened. Orders were brief. No speeches were made. No threats were spoken. Michael received a private message from a contact in Space Command. "They're calling it an experiment," the message read. "They think we'll protest." Michael stared at the words. He felt something cold settle in his chest. Jessica stepped closer. She had read the message over his shoulder. "They don't understand," she said quietly. "No," Michael replied. "They really don't." The scholars continued to observe. They noted that humans were no longer posting emotional messages. Instead, they shared verified information. False reports were corrected quickly. Old arguments disappeared. One scholar found this strange. "Where is the release?" it asked. "Where is the violence?" Another responded, "Delayed reaction. Insignificant." The broadcast from the colony resumed briefly. A final automated camera showed the settlement in ruins. Fires burned unchecked. No movement was visible. The feed ended. Jessica turned away from the screen. Her hands were steady now. "They're all gone," she said. Michael nodded once. "Yes." Around the world, people stood up from their chairs. They closed screens. They made calls. They packed bags. They did not speak of revenge. They spoke of duty. The scholars' instruments detected something new. Emotional levels were not falling. They were changing. Anger was no longer sharp. It was deep. The scholars dismissed it. Humans require time, the lead scholar said. They hesitate. On Earth, Michael left the center hours later. Outside, the city was quiet. Too quiet. Cars moved slowly. People walked with purpose, not fear. Jessica joined him at the exit. Do you think they know what they did? She asked. Michael looked up at the night sky. Somewhere beyond it, alien ships floated, watching and measuring. They think they pushed us, he said. They think that's all this was. Jessica nodded. Neither of them said the next thought out loud. Across Earth and its colonies, something was forming. It did not shout. It did not rush. It aligned. The scholars continued to watch their screens, confident in their data, unaware that the most important change could not be measured yet. Human rage had not exploded. It had focused, and it had begun to move. The warning came quietly. David Turner was already awake when the alert reached his console. It was not loud. It did not flash red. It was a soft signal that meant one thing. Movement had been detected near human space. Not an attack yet. Not officially. But close enough. David straightened in his chair. Around him, the evacuation center hummed with low sound. Screens showed colony maps, transport lanes, and population numbers. Lauren Hayes stood at the main table, reading incoming reports with calm focus. They're shifting positions, David said. Closer than before. Lauren nodded. Then we move first. There was no debate. Within minutes, evacuation orders were sent to outer colonies and trade stations. The message was simple. Clear. No panic words. Just instructions. Prepare. Move. Help each other. Ships began to leave docks in steady lines. Families boarded transports without shouting. Children held hands. Elders were guided carefully. No one pushed. David watched the numbers change. Every successful launch felt like a breath taken at the right time. Lauren moved from station to station, checking on crews. She spoke softly but firmly. When someone hesitated, she placed a hand on their shoulder and met their eyes. We know what we're doing, she said again and again. And they did. Far above, the alien scholars watched the data streams. Evacuation patterns appeared across their displays. Ships moving. Systems powering up. Communications tightening. Defensive behavior, one scholar said. Fear response. Another adjusted its sensors. But unusually calm. Humans delay conflict, the lead scholar replied. They retreat. At the same time, in Earth's orbital command ring, John Miller stood before a wide window. Beyond it, human fleets waited in silence. Long shapes rested against the dark, weapons powered down but ready. Ashley Cole entered the room with a tablet in hand. All fleets accounted for, she said. No speeches. No delays. John gave a short nod. Good. He turned back to the window. Ships of many designs floated there. Old and new. Military and civilian retrofits. They were not arranged for display. They were arranged for function. Ashley stood beside him. We have confirmation, she said. The scholars still think this is fear. John almost smiled. Let them, he said. The orders went out without ceremony. Fleets shifted positions not toward attack routes but toward control points. Supply lines. Communication hubs. Travel corridors the scholars depended on. Ashley watched the movement unfold on her screen. They're not expecting this, she said. No, John replied. They expect noise. Back at the evacuation center, David noticed something strange. The communication traffic between human groups was dropping. Not because people stopped talking but because they no longer needed to. Plans were aligning. Lauren noticed it too. They're sinking, she said quietly. Yes, David replied. Without being told. A transport captain checked in. We've taken extra passengers from Station 9, the voice said. No room but we'll manage. Lauren responded at once. Understood. Thank you. There was no reward offered. None was needed. The scholars' instruments detected rising neural activity across human populations. Anger markers appeared clearly now. Rage increasing, one scholar said. Unstable phase incoming. But there was no chaos. Human command centers did not fill with shouting. There were no angry speeches sent across networks. Leaders did not appear on screens to promise revenge. Instead, systems locked down. Data channels narrowed. Command shortened. Human rage had taken a different shape. It sharpened. John watched as a final fleet moved into position. Ashley checked her tablet one last time. "They're still observing," she said. "No response yet." "They're confused," John said. "That's fine." On a scholar station, a junior observer spoke hesitantly. "Human fleets are not advancing," it said. "They are surrounding." The lead scholar frowned. "Explain." "They are controlling movement without direct engagement." Silence followed. Another scholar reviewed historical data again, comparing it to the present. Its voice lowered. "This does not match fear behavior." The lead scholar dismissed the concern. "They are stalling. Anger makes them cautious." Back on Earth, Ashley received a message from Evacuation Command. "All priority zones cleared," the message read. "Minimal loss." She showed it to John. "Good," he said simply. David leaned back for the first time in hours. His hands ached, but his breathing was steady. Lauren sat beside him, watching the final transport leave danger space. "They're ready," she said. "Yes," David replied. "So are we." The scholars finally noticed the pattern break. Human fleets were now positioned in ways that cut off scholar movement entirely. Research ships found their paths blocked. Observation stations lost contact one by one, not destroyed but isolated. "What is happening?" one scholar asked. The lead scholar studied the screen, its confidence fading. "They are not attacking," it said slowly. "They are controlling the field." A realization began to form, late and unwelcome. Human anger had not scattered their plans. It had refined them. In the quiet between stars, the scholars watched their options disappear. Every move they considered had already been anticipated. Every path was covered. On Earth, John rested his hands on the console. "Hold," he ordered. Ashley looked at him. "That's it." "Yes," he said. "For now." The fleet stayed still. That was when the scholars understood. Human rage was not loud. It did not rush forward. It waited. It planned. And once it moved, it left no space to escape. Daniel Price watched the final confirmation appear on his screen. Every evacuation route was clear. Every human ship was in position. No alarms sounded. No voices rose in panic. The room around him was quiet, filled only with low system hums and steady breathing. He preferred it that way. Daniel was not a man who enjoyed war. He had studied it long enough to know what it cost. That was why he had been chosen. He did not act from pride or hate. He acted from purpose. The alien scholars still believed this moment would pass. Their stations continued to orbit calmly. Research ships drifted where they always had. Sensors pointed outward, watching human emotion instead of human movement. That mistake would end the experiment. Daniel raised his hand slightly. The signal spread across the fleet, silent and instant. No speech followed. No countdown. Every commander already knew the plan. The counterstrike began without warning. Human ships did not fire wildly. They did not burn cities or break worlds. Instead, narrow beams struck communication arrays. Control nodes went dark. Power relays shut down with clean precision. One scholar station lost gravity for 6 seconds. Just long enough for panic to register. Then systems failed completely. Inside that station, alarms finally screamed. Scholars moved quickly, calling out to each other. Data streams froze. Observation logs cut off mid-sentence. "What is happening?" one scholar demanded. There was no answer. Another station tried to flee. Engines powered up, but space folded ahead of it as human ships locked the corridor. A single pulse disabled its drive. The station drifted, helpless but intact. Daniel watched the feeds without emotion. Each target went quiet exactly as planned. "Minimal damage confirmed," a voice reported. "No civilian loss." "Proceed," Daniel replied. The scholars tried to respond at last. Emergency signals were sent. Apologies followed. Then threats. Then silence again as human systems cut the channels cleanly. They did not understand the pattern until it was almost over. This was not revenge. This was correction. On one distant station, a senior scholar stared at the dark screens around it. Its hands shook as it reviewed what little data still remained. "They are not destroying us," it said slowly. "They are ending our ability to act." Another scholar looked up. "Why?" The answer arrived too late. Human ships moved in close formation around the remaining stations. Weapons stayed powered but unused. Boarding craft approached only when resistance was impossible. Daniel gave the final order. "Secure the sites. Retrieve survivors. End the experiment." On Earth, people watched short official messages appear on their screens. No images of fire. No victory speeches. Just confirmation. The threat was contained. Michael and Jessica read the notice in silence. They thought of the colony that was gone. Of the voices that would never return. Their anger did not fade, but it no longer burned. It settled. Back among the stars, scholars were escorted from their stations under human guard. No insults were spoken. No blows were given. The scholars were treated with care they no longer deserved. One scholar finally asked the question it should have asked before. Why spare us? The human officer guiding it answered simply. So you remember. Daniel stood alone when the last station went silent. Incomplete data filled the scholar archives. Emotional graphs ended abruptly. The final notes showed confusion, not understanding. He allowed himself a slow breath. Humanity did not chase the retreating scholar fleet. No territory was taken. No banners were raised. The fleets returned to holding positions, then slowly withdrew. The message was clear. Do not test us like this again. Across human space, life began to return to normal. Ships resumed trade. Children went back to school. The silence eased, but it did not vanish completely. It stayed as memory. Daniel sent his final report. It was short. Experiment concluded. Threat neutralized. Purpose achieved. He shut down the console and looked out at the stars. They looked the same as always, distant and cold. But now they knew. Humanity had not fought to rule. Humanity had fought to draw a line. And once drawn, it would not be crossed again. The scholar fleet moved away from human space in slow, careful lines. Their ships no longer drifted with curiosity. They kept distance now, their paths wide and cautious. No one followed them. No weapons tracked their retreat. They were allowed to leave. Inside the lead vessel, the final record was being made. The remaining data was broken and incomplete, but the lesson was clear enough. One scholar spoke while the others listened in silence. Human rage is not a flaw, it said. It is a guardian. It sleeps until needed. When awakened, it protects with purpose. The words were stored and sealed. No edits were made. Back on Earth, James Carter stepped out of a transport and into the open air. The city around him was busy again. People walked to work. Vehicles moved in steady lines. Life had resumed its rhythm. Emily Ross stood beside him, watching workers repair a damaged tower nearby. Sparks flashed as metal was welded back into place. No one looked up at the sky anymore. They've gone, James said. Emily nodded. Yes. They stood there for a moment, letting the noise of rebuilding surround them. Hammers struck. Machines hummed. Voices called out measurements and times. It was not celebration. It was repair. James turned and began walking toward the reconstruction center. Emily followed. Inside, plans covered the walls. Colony maps were marked with new routes and stronger shields. Names were written carefully in records, not forgotten. They lost too much, Emily said quietly, looking at one list. Yes, James replied. But we didn't lose ourselves. Across the galaxy, messages spread fast. Traders, diplomats, and explorers shared the same story. Human space was calm again, but no one mistook that calm for weakness. Other species adjusted their routes. Some canceled planned tests. Others sent careful messages asking for clear rules and borders. Humans answered politely. The answers were firm. On a distant scholar world, the final report was presented. It was brief. There were no charts, no emotional graphs. Only words. We studied anger, the report read. We misunderstood it. Human restraint is not fear. It is choice. The scholars listened in silence. They had believed fury was the danger. Now they knew better. Weeks passed. The damaged colony was marked as a place of memory. New colonies were planned with care and protection. No grand speeches were made. No monuments were raised in orbit. James visited the memorial once, alone. He stood still, hands folded, and said nothing. Emily waited nearby, giving him space. When he returned, his face was calm. Life continued. Ships launched. Children laughed. Arguments happened and ended. Human rage returned to its quiet place, watching from deep within. The galaxy learned a new truth. Fury could burn fast and blind. Restraint could wait. And when restraint finally moved, it was already too late to stop it.